Good God, conversations that matter about faith and public life. I'm your host, George Mason, and I'm delighted to welcome to our podcast today, Jaynie Schultz. Jaynie, welcome.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Jaynie is a District 11 City Council member for the Dallas City Council and has been since 2021, so 2 terms, and has decided not to run again. So let's begin, I guess, Jaynie, with what got you interested in running for office, and then what is it that got you to say enough is enough?
Sure, that's a great question. Actually, it starts back when I was 15.
All right.
And I promise not to go through my whole life. But when I was 15, I was fortunate enough to have an internship at Dallas City Hall.
Wow.
And I decided that I was going to be a city manager. I didn't know what that was. But then life took me in different paths. But I did end up with all of my education, including my master's degree in urban studies.
Yes.
And so I always loved it.
Right.
And then in 2014, I was very active in my neighborhood association. And there was a zoning case that came about. And I went up to the planning commissioner and I was like, how do you get to do this? This is so cool. And he had been looking for a replacement for himself. So in 2014, I joined the City Planning Commission and stayed on that until it was an open seat. My predecessor did term out,
Right.
so it was an open seat, and that's when I decided that the next thing that I could do would be to sort of expand how I was serving.
Right.
So it's been 11 years, and that's a lot of public service.
It is.
And it's also when you're in the Planning Commission, and those 7 years that I did that it's the hardest because it's the only time you sometimes go up against your own neighbors. Everything else is sort of, the other appointments are more joyful, if you will.
Yes.
So.
Let me just follow up with that for a minute, because
Sure.
the Planning Commission, as you say, is difficult because you come up against neighbors. To interpret that for our listeners, this is really where at times you need to support projects in particular neighborhoods, but the neighbors are not for it because, and this is the language of NIMBYism, right? So not in my backyard. And this is a terrible challenge for every urban area, isn't it? Because we have neighborhoods that have a sense of identity and cohesion. They have a sense that they want to keep their property values up because this is an investment in their homes. And if we want to put affordable housing or low-income housing or some such thing in a neighborhood like that, or kind of business that they're not necessarily thinking will bring the right people into the neighborhood, or it will lower their tax, their valuations, this is where they push back. And yet, we need these things in a community, right? So how do you go about that in addressing their concerns, but nonetheless helping them see the big picture?
Sure. And I think, George, let me just expand on what you were saying in terms of the neighborhoods, because it's not always about affordability. It's not always about different people. There are plenty of neighborhoods who don't want anything to change at all.
Yes.
But here's what we know. We know that until we add more housing at every price point, right, volume will bring the prices down for everyone.
Yes.
We also know that new development actually increases property taxes. So to address your challenge, I think there's 2 things. One is really helping educate people about the impact of these changes,
Right.
because so much of it is fear of the unknown, and they're using false information, not maliciously false, but just things that people assume, right? So we have to really try to educate as much as possible, and the people get it. And interestingly, when you use the phrase NIMBY, there's a whole new movement called YIGBY. I don't know
Yes.
if you're familiar with this.
I've heard this.
Have
but go
you?
ahead. Go ahead.
Yes, in God's backyard.
That's nice.
And so what we know is there's a tremendous amount of nonprofit land,
Yes.
whether it's churches or schools or
Right.
other nonprofits who over the years have accumulated multiple acres. And it's a great opportunity, I think, to really look at that and have our religious community, our faith community lead in this, because if they lead, then I think a lot of the opposition to the redevelopment of shopping centers or whatever, could be minimized.
Yes. Well, and I think this is part of a challenge about the nature of private property and ownership or possession of it that we see on a national scale and international scale, where people take the position that they own the land instead of the land owning them, in a sense, you know.
Correct. And they own, not only that, they own their land, but they also want to control what their neighbor's land is.
Right.
And so you really have to help people be honest with themselves and say, you can't have it both ways.
Right.
If you're going to tell your neighbor what to do, your neighbor gets to tell you what to do.
This is really important, and I think it goes to the point of also our faith traditions, because right now what we're seeing is a lot of interpretation of religious freedom in our country that is around my rights to hold the views I have and to worship the way I want to, and also to behave in whatever way I want, and the government must protect my right to do that. When the very heart of all of our religious traditions is that we are only free when we are actually looking after our neighbor and we are all participating in this sense of common good. And so whether it's about our property values or about development or about welfare programs or any of those sorts of things, it would be a tremendous help, I'm sure, in civic life for people like you if we had more people voice this sense that I know that my welfare is tied to my neighbor's and that I cannot just claim it for myself apart from someone else.
Correct. I mean, if we truly believe that we're all God's people, then some don't have more privilege than others. They may have more assets, but then we are obliged to share those.
Yes.
So yes, I agree with you completely, and it's part of my, my faith as well.
Well, let's talk about your faith. You're Jewish, and I think we've talked off camera about how that is a factor in your public service and about in your life. So what is it about your practice of your Jewish faith tradition that leads you to engage and view the world this way and also public service?
Sure. I mean, it is who I am. It's the lens through which I do everything that I do. My colleagues tease me all the time because as a people, as a Jewish people, which we are, I mean, I use a lot of phraseology. I use a lot of values that that come through.
Right.
And so we are obliged to make the world better.
Right.
We're obliged to contribute. Some people, historically were sort of the court Jews, which I guess you could call me that now, in public service and civic service. And then others, of course, do it privately.
Right.
But this idea of giving back to your community is part and parcel of my people.
Right.
And that includes our engagement. I mean, we are living in the golden era of Jewish engagement in civic life. We've never been allowed to participate to the levels we are, and we should do that as much as possible.
And yet, and maybe it's because previously you couldn't have done that as well, there's always been accusations from people of conspiracy theorists about Jews working behind the scenes and all that sort of thing, as if Jews are one thing. What we know even on the council is that there's more than one Jewish perspective on things. And that part of being Jewish is, I've come to learn it, is to have an ongoing argument about even what it means to be Jewish, right?
Correct. We are born, I mean, the word, right?
Right.
To wrestle with God.
Right.
You know?
Exactly. Israel.
That's
Yeah.
who we are.
Right.
We were born arguing. We do it, I wouldn't say for fun, but it is who we are.
Right.
And so that debate, the ongoing debate about what the world should be, what should happen in Dallas, what
Right.
should happen with this particular item on our agenda, is something that we don't hesitate to participate in.
Right.
What's clear, though, and undisputed, is the respect with which we must have that debate.
Right.
And so when it deteriorates and anybody ever, whether it's staff or a colleague, feels humiliated. I mean, we know in Jewish tradition
Right.
that when someone is embarrassed, it's as if you were murdered them.
Right.
I mean, it's that serious of a
Right.
crime.
Right.
And so that is over the line, and it's not part of anything that is Jewish. Somebody may claim to be Jewish, but they're not behaving as such.
Well, I think if you were to push me about what it means to be Christian and all of that, I would want to say some similar things about the fact that we're to honor all people and to respect all people, and when we don't, we are violating our own faith tradition in that process. So, well, thank you for that. I think there are a lot of people who today, it seems, are thinking about their religious convictions, and they want the government to protect their right to believe what they want to believe, but sometimes it's also their right to hold views and to discriminate against their neighbors instead of their right to practice their faith on behalf of their neighbors. And this is really a challenging moment, I think, in our country, right?
It is, and I think that's why the adage that we say of Hillel, right?
Yes.
Do not do unto others as you would not have them do unto
Yes.
you. That negative aspect of it is the crucial piece of it.
Right.
It's not easily flipped.
Yes.
Because it's not meant to be.
Right.
So if you want your private property in a zoning case, that's great. And and I'm not going to really do anything unless what you're doing is going to harm others on that property,
Right.
like our tree ordinances,
Yes, right.
things like that. But then don't turn around. You can't
Right.
have it both ways.
So you mentioned tree ordinances, and I was just thinking about the fact that there was just a public forum for candidates in District 11 and 12, 11 being yours for your successor, and I learned that the most important issue that kept coming up in the group was trash collection. And it does seem to me that there is a kind of minutia about being a council member and about serving in public. So you get grand thoughts about how you want to help improve the world, and then it becomes about tree ordinances and about trash collection and all of that. And the nitty-gritty can probably wear you down a little bit in terms of your ideals. How do you deal with that?
It does. I mean, at the same time, that's why, that cliche, everything is local,
Yes.
right? I mean, I certainly have a much deeper relationship with my constituents than as you go up the food chain, if you will, of politics, that day to day, right?
Yes.
But I think that the way that we deal with it, first of all, is we develop our own relationships with each other, where
Sure.
we, can jokingly talk about trash collection or something that may not seem terribly important to you, but is deeply important to Mrs. Whoever.
Right.
So we do have to take that seriously. At the same time, that can't guide us.
Right.
Things like trees, on the other hand, is everybody, right? That's
Right.
our lungs, that's what we need.
Right.
It actually increases property values, all of those things. So our job, and it's some of the work that I've done, is the way that I decided to approach my relationship. There's two ways to lead, in my opinion. There's leaders who, at the local level, who say, whatever the loudest voices in my district want, that's what I'm going to do, and I'm obliged to do that.
Right.
And then there are leaders like me who I get vilified frequently because what I say is my job is to listen to you. But that doesn't mean I have to agree with you, and it doesn't mean I have to do what you want. It's sort of like when I was teaching, I taught Jewish literacy for 13 years.
Oh, wow.
And I remember us laughing in class about how in Judaism, we believe that God hears all of our prayers. It doesn't mean he's going to answer them. Right? Sometimes the answer is no.
Right.
And so I think sometimes we have to agree to disagree about what's in the best interest of the city or the district. I do not have to do everything that the loudest voices in my district want if it's not in the best interest of the city or the district.
And that is one of the challenges of a 14-1 plan, isn't it? When you have what amounts to precinct politics in a sense, and the question is, and with this, we went way back when we were trying to decide on 14-1 or 10-4-1 and how to get this sense of, yes, we want fair representation, but we also want people to think about the whole.
Correct.
And so we ended up with a system that I think was a kind of correction of the old system, but maybe an overcorrection.
Yeah.
And it depends upon the virtue of people who can represent their views, but also think voluntarily of the larger picture.
Correct, and it takes a different kind of bravery.
Yes.
It's really easy, and frankly, I would argue lazy, to just say, oh, they want it, so I'm going to do it, even if it's not the right thing. But to have a moral compass and be willing to stand with that, even if it means you make some people in your district angry, whether it's over a zoning case or something else. Sanitation.
Right.
That takes a different kind of courage. And so that's where our faith comes in, and my grounding, I was really gifted with a good education to understand that I know that this is what I'm meant to do through my Jewish peoplehood and through my faith.
Well, Jaynie, you seem to show up in a lot of the places I tend to show up. And so, whether it's an MLK event, a food sustainability plan event, or something of that nature, and I'm doing it because I'm a minister and because I'm a religious leader and want to be engaged in the public good, and as it turns out, you're doing it for a lot of the same reasons.
Yeah, but that's what we do.
Exactly, right. Yeah. So one of the things that we did recently was we were part of a convening of a group of people who were trying to address food access and food availability, which is not evenly distributed throughout the city. And we met at a center that you had something to do with creating in North Dallas, which is part of District 11. Tell us more about that place.
Sure. Thank you for asking about it. It's one of my two children, if you will, two babies that I want to see get over the finish line. The International District is an area that was designated by the Dallas City Council as a whole. It's the Galleria of Old Valley View. So Preston to 635, Preston to the Tollway, 635 up to Alpha, that 450 or so acre area. And the idea is that it'll become the place with an international theme that'll enable us to build out that community in Dallas. The actual building that you were in was acquired as part of a larger park. We just acquired our second parcel, Dallas City Council, through the bond, which our residents want. So that because we're in a park desert, just like it's a food desert in southern Dallas, it's a park desert in North Dallas. So we're trying to right that wrong as well. So it's used now as a way to bring people together for all kinds of reasons, like whether it's food issues or neighborhood meetings. Anyone's welcome to contact our office if they'd like to use it. And then it's also a place for international trade offices of countries from all over the world, everything from Ethiopia to the EU, have offices there, and to do business with Dallas to grow our tax base.
There must be some anxiety in that building right now after all these tariffs have been
I think
issued.
There's a lot of conversations going on. Yeah, it's a scary time for sure.
Well, thank you for that. And we could go into a lot more detail about some of the issues that we're working on, like food sustainability. And the exciting thing is that we are taking new steps toward creating a Dallas food plan.
Yes, we are.
Which is, really, I think, a first for us, and a comprehensive view of Dallas and how we we source our food and what kind of food and who gets it and the price of it and all those sorts of things. So this is something that you all can pray about and learn about and understand that it's every part of Dallas is not created equal.
Correct. And I think in addition to that, what we have to look at overall for every issue, whether it's the environment or food or housing or all of those things, is we have to look at these things systemically
Right.
rather than just putting a Band-Aid on a
Right.
series of cuts.
Yes.
And so the better way to approach all of these overall problems is to look at it systemically. So this will be the first time. I'm very involved with this, looking at it systemically and how can we help. And I think we're moving in that same direction with housing. You know, we turn to the city, I think, too often and say, solve our social problem,
Right.
even though it touches the private sector, the faith sector,
Exactly.
residents, all of it. So we need to
Right.
all work together on these problems.
And this is something Faith Commons, my organization, is doing
Yes.
alongside and with you and,
Yes.
and has been at work on these things also. Well, a lot of what we're talking about, though, also has to do with the soul of the city, with our spiritual well-being, not just our economic life, not just our the way we organize our politics, but the sense of who we are and how we develop that. Now, even before you came to public service, you were involved in retreat center kinds of work. So tell us about that and how that has helped to feed into what you've done.
Thank you. So that's actually what diverted me from a professional public service. I went into business with my mother in 1988. We bought, built, and owned and operated a retreat center, a small retreat center. And so this idea of bringing groups together to create for themselves a common vision, whether it's for their business or their nonprofit or even family reunions, things like that. This idea to bring people together, it's joyous, it's deep, and it can be impactful if it's crafted correctly. And so where that translated for us is one of the very first things that we did for District 11 is we decided that our North Star would be where everyone belongs. That's been our motto. We put it on our coffee cups, our pins, all of those things to remind ourselves that everyone has a place here and everyone then has a voice, which means the first question we should be asking ourselves if we're on a nonprofit board or if we're doing something for businesses, who's not at the table and why?
Right.
How do we bring them here? And so I think that that's the secret to the soul of Dallas is to say, everyone is welcome here, everyone belongs here, and we want to hear your voice. And if you can't find a way in, we need to help you find a way in.
Right.
So that everybody's heard.
When you say everybody, that's a word that really resonates with me. It's actually part of the subtitle of a book of my sermons. And years ago, I decided to separate the words every and body in that, just because when we say easily everyone or everybody, sometimes we don't emphasize enough that we have all kinds of bodies. We are all kinds of people with all kinds of identities. And we say everybody, but then we start really appealing only to people like us. And I think this concept of what you're talking about is important. And yet, we can't seem, Jaynie, to get everybody to be engaged and to, let's say, even to vote. The turnout for voting for civic elections is abysmal. I mean, about what, 8%?
If that.
If that, on a good year,
Yes.
right? And sometimes even as low as 2%, which is just discouraging because we have a representative democracy. And so I know that one of the things we're trying to do is to move local elections to November instead of May to focus on that. Well, actually, to generate more participation.
Yes.
What would you say to people who are out there who just get too busy and they're not really engaged and they don't see how it really matters? what would you say to them about their voting patterns?
Well, I mean, if they drive on the streets
Yeah.
or ride their bikes,
Right.
if they own a home and have sanitation,
Right.
if they care about public safety, then it's essential that they choose people that will represent them for those things,
Right.
and that will help make our city better. So to decline to speak is as much of an action to me as speaking out. And so
Right.
it's so easy to vote that anyone who says, well, I just couldn't get to it, well, it's really hard. It's really hard
Yes.
to be able to respond and include everyone. There are some things we can do. So, for example, the turnout among people who rent is significantly less
Yes.
than people who own homes.
Okay.
And so one of the items that we sort of touched on, but I really, frankly, didn't have enough time in my service, is to bring out how do we engage renters.
Yes.
Right? I think that's where our clergy, frankly,
Right.
in voter turnout, our clergy has an obligation to help make sure everybody in their congregation votes.
Yes.
I think that the ways that there's little tools, but I don't understand why somebody doesn't vote. I have a
Right.
really hard time understanding that.
Well, and I think, part of our frustration, and one of the things Faith Commons is engaged in, is with the United Way, bringing together groups that are about voter access and
Yes.
expanding voter rights and voter opportunity. And actually, our legislature is trying to take it the other direction and be
Right.
more restrictive. And again, we sort of know why that is,
Right.
because certain people who are in power think that if renters who are typically lower income, perhaps not entirely, but maybe they will vote differently, and it will upend the political system.
I think it's also, and I think it's just like, again, back to Jewish tradition, it is absolutely a parent's obligation to give their child an education.
Right.
I believe that it is absolutely a parent's obligation to engage their children civically.
Great.
So
There you go.
every parent ought to mandate that their children vote, and then it becomes muscle memory.
Oh, nice.
Right? My own kids are like, should I send in an absentee ballot for this? They don't even know. They don't need to ask anymore, right? And so I think that is another way, besides all the barriers that are
Yes.
being thrown at us. No one, every parent, let me just leave it at that.
Yeah.
Every parent should insist that their children participate.
Great, great.
Yeah.
Well, I think we have public officials who often enter into service and they get beaten down even by their own constituents, right?
Yeah.
The criticism gets to be frustrating. And I wonder, do you have some good stories about people who just call to encourage you?
Sure.
About, and how people who live in districts and have representatives, how can you help them? How can you,
Thank you.
keep them excited about the work?
Thank you. Yes, I mean, I'm going to answer that directly, and I'm also going to tell you, I'd like to be able to share why I'm not running again, because
Okay, yeah,
people
sure.
do assume that it's because I was beaten down, when
Okay,
in fact
all right.
it's not. But yes, every single time I get a text or a voicemail or an email that says "thank you," that's all they have to say.
Wow.
Thank you. It is 1,000 times more powerful than people who say you should be recalled or out of office.
Right.
Those are easy to toss away.
Okay.
Because it's the same thing, I think, for all human beings. When you receive a compliment or appreciation, it's, the impact is 10 times that of
Great.
somebody's insult, which is easy to just roll off, especially if you've been in public service where you're used to that.
Right, right.
Right. So maybe because it's less.
Okay, so let's just say that in this conversation, Faith Commons and good God is saying thank you, Jaynie.
Thank you. It's been an honor. Yes.
Yeah. Oh, and
Yes.
you want to tell us, I think, also why you're not
I
running.
do, because a lot of people think, especially because we've had some really controversial issues in District 11, as of late, and so they're like, that's why she's not running. In fact, first of all, I believe that the reason that we have 2-year terms is to give us sort of like, I know in Judaism, Yom Kippur, you're like once a year you get a chance to reflect. So I think every 2 years, a good leader should reflect and say, do I want to keep doing this? Do people want me to keep doing this? Am I continuing to do good?
Right.
So when I first got elected, I made a list of everything I wanted to accomplish. And I actually got them all accomplished, except for I thought I could, because of my history with nonprofits and governance and boards, I thought I could change the culture on the council. And then I realized one person can't do that.
Yes.
So other than that, so first of all, my list was done. Second, I really began to, at the end of when I got reelected the second time is when I began to think, do I want to run a third time?
Yes.
And the reason I decided no was because I'm in an age of my life and I'm in a window of my life where I'm strong, I don't have grandkids yet, I'm ready to go do some other things.
Yes.
And actually it was from a podcast I heard where they said they had thought about their lives in thirds.
Nice.
And so when I started thinking about that last third of my life, what do I want it to be? And I decided that I wanted it to be more about reflection and exploration than direct, hard, daily action.
Okay, that's lovely.
Yeah.
I think that's a spiritual decision.
It was.
And ding, 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 that feels very familiar to me as well,
Yes.
so, as you might imagine.
Right.
Well, Jaynie Schultz, thank you for your public service. Thank you for the way your faith has led you into it and for all that you have done for our city. I know we'll see you around even after your term is up soon. But thank you again, and thank you for being on Good God.
It's been an honor. This is wonderful. Thank you for including me.
Terrific.
Yeah.